Okay, so I'm starting a new order here, and we're going to be building a big entertainment console, TV slash console center. And this is going to be made with some birch plywood here, some 3/4 inch. Dimensions of this center will be 80 by 20 by 28, roughly. Um, and we're going to be using, like I said, 3/4 inch birch. We're going to be using two sheets. We're going to cut down now. We're going to lay out, and we're going to cut this down to manageable sizes before we bring over to the table saw. We're going to use the track saw for this to do our cross cuts and cut our longer pieces and that I don't want to put on the table saw. So we're going to use the track saw to lay this out, cut this all down, and then we're going to bring the rest to the table saw, and then we will cut down to the final width and length for all of our pieces. This is going to be our carcass here, and we'll also be cutting up our shelves and everything else, our dividers, etc. So the rest of the table will be made with poplar for our trim slash, I guess we'll call it our face frame, and our top and our bottom platform. We're going to be using poplar. So, and this is going to be, unfortunately, we're going to be painting this, and this is where, I had some difficulty with this project. This was a tough project for me. It's a big center here, and I'm in a small shop, and I'm also working on other projects, so my space is really limited, especially for cutting up plywood. So I do this outside on some styrofoam, and I use a track saw, like I said, and I'm just going to put my rails together here, just combine them, just to make it a little easier, and to cut the full length. We're going to cut 20-inch pieces in length here to start, and then we're going to rip them down for the side panels, and also for our center dividers. But we're going to have a full piece for the bottom, then we'll have our strips up top for the back and the top to run across. So this is how we're going to lay this out. We're going to use the track saw to start out. Just make it easier. I'm going to put some tape on some of these pieces, but I typically don't have too many issues cutting with this track saw. It cuts really clean, so it's not something necessary. Matter of fact, it kind of created more issues for me because the first cut didn't come out straight as I like, because my tape wasn't laid out straight as I like. But it was fine. When you take over the table saw, we're going to overcut right now, and then we'll take over the table saw to finish up our cuts to get to our final dimensions. And that's just the easiest way to do this. And like I said, the track saw makes easy work of this, especially for our cross cuts. It's safer, it's cleaner, and it just makes it a little easier. So now, like I said, we're going to take it to the table saw, and we'll finish this all up and lay this all out. And assembly this is not a bad. It's pretty simple, and it wasn't too difficult at all. And for assembly, we're going to be using some dado cuts for our backs and tops, nailers and stretchers, and then we're going to be using the domino and some mortise and tenon for our center dividers and sides. So, and also for our top piece. So we're going to be using the domino for a few steps in this project. So you don't have to do this. You could just technically use glue and brad nails as long as you have your measurements laid out. And some trim head screws, which I'm going to do anyway, also just to help secure this. But you can also use nails, or you could just use pocket holes if you really wanted to. I don't like using pocket holes for center dividers and things because you can see them then. If there's drawers going in, it's a little different. But there's no drawers. It's going to be all open console. So I'm going to try to make it as clean as possible, and I don't want the client to be able to see any joinery if possible. So sometimes you can also use rabbets, and I've done that in the past. And we're going to use a rabbet / dado for our top stretchers and bottom, just to fit our grooves in. But right now we're just going to be using a domino and laying everything out, and just some glue, brad nails, and trim head screws. So the hardest part of this project to start is going to just laying everything out, getting our center dividers. We're also going to be using a dado cut for our two end shelves. So they're going to be hard fixed, and then we're going to have a center shelf, which is going to be about 31 inches long. That's going to be for the bulk of his materials, and that's going to be we're going to use shelf pins for that. That's what the client wants. So now we're going to put our dado stack in. Always remember to unplug your table saw, and we're going to put our stack in to the thickest level, 3/4 inch level here, and then we're just going to cut a dado on each center divider on one side, and also our end pieces. And you'll see in a little bit how it's going to look, but it just helps also secure the table, makes it a little stronger, and it just hard fixes them in. They won't be able to really mess with that. So, but the center shelf will be adjustable. So we'll do that later. But right now we're just going to cut our dado in each one of our center dividers on each one side, and then one side of our end caps here. So that's what we're doing here. We're just going to run the dado, take our time here. We're not going to run a real deep dado, but just something to rest that shelves in with some glue, and that will hold real tight. And now we're just going to start cutting up our, I guess we'll call them our nailers, even though this is not going to nail to anything, but we're going to lay out everything, and we're going to use our Carvex jigsaw to cut these little grooves out. You can also use a table saw, but these pieces are really long, so I just figured it'd be easier to use the jigsaw and just go real slow, set on a slow setting, so we don't, rip up the plywood, which is definitely a risk with a jigsaw, and also cut on the, well, there's really all sides are show side, but cut on the side won't be as noticeable if possible. But we're going to cut a real slow setting here. We're going to just take our time and just really just keep this, as clean as possible and as accurate as possible. You can set up a little jig here if you really wanted to, or use a circular saw, but this is just the simplest thing for me. You can also use a hand saw too to finish off your cut, but this Carvex works pretty good as long as you have your setting set to slow. You don't like rush through it. All right, so let's cut these all out. We'll cut these out, lay these out, and then we're going to start laying out our whole carcass. Okay, so here, as I said, we're going to be using a domino for this, and you got to. We're going to be using 6x40 millimeter dominoes, and the thing is with this, I have to set the plunge setting on the plywood itself to 15 rather than 20, which I normally would do. And the reason for that is I didn't want the plunger to go all the way through the 3/4 inch plywood, which it would have done. Now, it wouldn't have been a big deal because it was going to be flush. Honestly, it would kind of look cool as a through point tenon, but it's going to be on the bottom, so you wouldn't have seen it anyway. So I just set the plunge on the plywood to 15, and then I'll set the on the shelf, the divider here, we'll set that to 25 to offset it. So the domino will the tenon will fit perfectly in the mortise. So, and then we'll be able to dry fit and test this, which we're going to do. We're going to lay this out and test it. And the key with doing this is to have your piece of your divider laying on your carcass where you want to plunge and have your marking laid out. So you're going to take where you marked it on your divider on your bottom carcass here. So in other words, you're going to use that as your template, and then you're going to put your mark on the bottom carcass, and then you're going to lay your piece down, and then you're going to plunge, taking it off your footing on your domino, which I use on the end pieces, which I don't need for these. As you can see here, we're going to lay out our bottom piece, or our divider here, where we're going to plunge, and then we're just going to put our domino, and there's a center line on the plate on the bottom, which I'm looking at, which will let me plunge right into where I need to plunge, and this will lay for a perfect fit. And you got to remember, on the other side, it's going to be mirrored, so we're going to have your domino facing the other direction. So in other words, you don't want 22-inch space on one side of your center shelf, and then the 21 on the other side, because you didn't plunge the opposite direction. So that's what we're going to do here. We're going to lay everything out. We're going to dry fit everything. As you see here, we have the dados on the ends and the center divider on the one side. And now we're going to cut out our stretchers and aprons and our, I guess we'll call them our nailers, for our tops and backs and bottoms. And so we're going to fit these in perfectly. And we're, like I said, we're just going to lay it out dry fit. But before we do that, we're going to, and I could have done this at any point, we're going to use a shelf pin jig here. And we're going to put our shelf pin holes here. These are going to be 1/4 inch holes. We're going to be using the bit, this self-centering drill bit that came with the jig. But you know, there's multiple ways you could do this. You could use your router with your guide rail, or you could. This is probably the simplest way. You just got to be careful. Make sure you have your pins lined up correctly, so you don't have any offset holes. So now we're going to set this up. We're going to do the install. The install is a little tricky because it's a big unit. So this is going to be about 25 inches high, 24. But then with the bottom platform would be another 3 inches or so, and then the top another inch. So altogether it's going to be about 8 inches high. The client didn't want me to go over that. They said a little under would be fine. So we try to keep it a little under 28, just to give us some room to move everything around because we have to carry this in. So we're going to lay everything out. We're going to brad nail glue, and then later we're going to throw some countersink and trim head screws in just to secure this unit. And it was a little challenging getting everything laid out because it's so big. And obviously I don't have clamps that are 80 inches long to go one end to the other. And even if I did it, the pressure is going up and down here, as you see. There's not a lot of pressure going the long way. The only thing that would help with that was to keep everything square. And that was the challenge, keeping everything square. So we had to kind of tap things over, tap some of the center dividers over. I don't show all that, but I show some of it, I'm sure. And that's why I have the squares out. So we're going to try to keep everything as square as possible. It's tough with a big unit like this, but if you just take your time and tap things in as you're clamping, you can get it pretty square. And that's what we're doing here. We're just going to, like I said, we're going to countersink, run some trim head screws, some brad nails, some glue, and with the domino mortise tenon and some of these little dado cuts here, this builds a strong cabinet unit. Okay, so that's about it. We're going to finish this up, and then we're going to move on to the next steps. Okay, so now we're moving on to the top piece. The top's going to be roughly about 81 inches long when it's all said and done. So these are long pieces of wood here. So we just going to take these long pieces and we're going to use the track saw again to get a straight edge. And we're doing that because my jointer is just a benchtop jointer. It's just not big enough to run 81 inch long pieces. So while we're in the meantime, we're going to move on to onto the carcass again. Just finish that up so we can move the carcass out of the way, honestly, because it was on my outfeed table of my table saw. So now that that's finally secured with the trim head screws on the bottom, now we're able to finish milling up our table top, and we're going to lay everything out. We're going to be using biscuits and glue so we could get a nice strong build, but also keep everything nice and straight and level, so we don't have any offset pieces here. The biscuits definitely help with that. The key with this is not to over clamp. You just want to get a nice good squeeze out. The biscuits will keep everything self-aligned. I did throw a couple calls on just to be on the safe side, but really this came out pretty straight, so I wasn't really too concerned with this. So we're going to glue this up, clamp it up, let it dry for a day, and then we're going to move on to our next steps. So like most projects, while we have the biscuit joiner out, we're going to be putting some slots in the top stretchers and apron pieces just for when we mount the top for later. So we could put the biscuit joiner away. Actually, we won't because we're going to be using it again later But right now we're going to be setting this up, clean up our top now. So the biscuit joiner for the top, if you don't understand, that is for your Z clips. This allows for you to they're like a Z-shaped clip, and you put the one end in the slot, and the other end has a hole that you screw into your tabletop that holds everything secure, but also lets wood move over time. So like I said, we're going to finish up with this top. We're going to really start cleaning this up. We're going to sand it down. We're going to fill some holes with some CA glue, some thick set CA glue, and then we'll clean everything up. So next thing we're going to do here, we're going to set some trim up for the sides. And this is just going to be to hide some of the joinery, because you can see that on the end pieces, you can see where their aprons and stretchers come. You can see the plywood end. So this trim is just going to be real thin, because I can't go much longer with this carcass. I have to keep these pieces thin. These are purely cosmetic. There's nothing structural about them. And we're just going to be using some glue and some little pin nailer. We're going to be using a 23 gauge pin nailer and some glue. And we're going to be cutting these at 45-degree miters here and just putting these together. And this is a nice little touch, but these are very flimsy, so we just got to be careful with this moving around, because I will knock one or two of these off when I get to the end of finishing this and painting this. So move, because this is a big unit moving around, and it's easy to pull stuff like this off, especially with pin nails. So now we're going back onto the top. We're just going to finish it off. We're going to water pop it, because I'm seeing some little scratch marks with that grinder sander I put on there earlier. So now we're going to water pop it, and we're going to clean it up. We're going to run a chamfer on the sides, all four sides too, and then we're going to water pop it and then do a final sand up to about 200 grit. So now we're going to be setting up our trim. So we're not going to be doing a face frame for this, because I can't go any deeper. So these are going to be real thin pieces also. Not as thin as the end cap pieces, but these are pretty thin. So we're just going to be laying this out as trim with some glue and some pin nails. Since this will be painted, we'll fill the holes in with some putty, and then we will prepare for paint. Okay, so now we're going to be taking this 8/4 inch poplar, and we're going to be building our bottom platform frame base, I guess we'll call it. And we're going to be using we'll be using a little pine too for our center dividers for that going across. But and we're going to be staining this all the same color at the end as the top. So we're going to lay out. It's going to be like a ladder build, and we're going to have it spaced on the end. And now I'm going to leave the end open in case we do decide to put feet on it at a later time. But right now, I didn't want to put feet on it because I didn't want the thing to sag over time, because this is a really big unit. And I just figured this thick wood laying flat would be the strongest platform for it, almost like a toe kick, which is exactly what's going to be with dimension-wise and everything. So we're just going to be building this little ladder base here, putting it together, and you guess it, we're going to be using domino for this. We're going to be using the 10x50 domino, and we're going to be using that, some glue, and just clamp it up, and then we'll sand it down, clean it up, and then we'll stain this to match the top. Okay, so now we're going to clamp up our bottom base here, let this sit for a few hours. Then we're going to move on to finishing up, cleaning up this carcass, especially here, and our shelves. So we're going to run a flush trim router bit here, just clean up any unevenness, and then we're going to put some putty in all the holes, the brad nail and pin nail holes, and also we're going to be using another trim router to run a chamfer on all the trim pieces on the front face frame, we'll call it. And then we're going to sand everything up to about 320 grit, just to get a nice preparation for paint after we trim out all the rest of our pieces for our shelves. Here, since we don't use veneer, we're going to be using some thin poplar pieces with some glue, some clamps, and some pin nails just to hold this on. This is strictly mainly cosmetic. And also you saw that we're going to use the biscuit for the bottom platform. That's going to be used for holding Z-clips for the bottom. So now we're going to also trim out the back here. This back strip here, we're going to be covering up any plywood end here with some more thin pieces of poplar, since the back will be opened and the client wanted it that way. So now we're getting ready to prepare for our paint and stain. So here we're going to be running some primer and with a scuff sand in between. So I had some difficulty with this project due to my my good airless sprayer. My nozzles hand sprayer is leaking. I bought a new guard and also new tips. It's still leaking, so I didn't have time to really troubleshoot it. So we're going to be using just the HVLP sprayer. It takes a lot longer. It doesn't lay as nice, so we have to do a little brushing, a little wiping, rolling of the paint to get a nice clean paint job. But it wasn't as nice as I was liking. It took a lot longer than I would like. So now we're going to be finishing up our tops and the bottom platform with some weathered gray stain. Just going to be staining this up, and we're going to be finishing this with some polyurethane for the top, and we're going to scuff sand in between each coat of. We're going to be laying 3 coats, and that's pretty much it. So now we're going to like I said, we're going to polyurethane, and then we're going to do our final install of the bottom platform with the Z-clips and some screws, and same thing with the top. It's going to be repetitive steps. We'll show them, but it's going to be just quick. It's going to be screwing these in with some self-tapping screws. Here, this is the bottom. We're underneath the carcass. Right now, we're going to mount this bottom platform with the Z-clips. And after we finish the top here, we're going to do the same exact steps. We're going to be using Z-clips and some self-tapping screws. They're going to be about 1-inch long screws. And we're just going to screw these in. You can also hand tighten these if you like, but that's the way we're going to do it. And this is pretty much it. It's pretty much assembled and ready to go. Okay, so the order is done. We're going to ship it out to the client. Hopefully they love it. It came out pretty good to me. The paint was a little bit of a struggle, but it was a fun build, and I love doing this kind of stuff. If you have any questions or comments, let me know. Thanks for watching.